What's that sound? It's For Amusement Only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast. Welcome to episode 2 of the For Amusement Only EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast. My name is Nick Baldridge. Today I wanted to just discuss briefly where I get my information about bingos. Now, because I am younger and haven't played them in the wild, I've only experienced them in home collections or at pinball shows. And so my experience is pretty limited, and honestly, I am not an expert. I'm going to do my best to explain these things, and I'll do that with the help of Jeffrey Lawton, who is the Bingo King. He has written 2 different books, one on Bally Bingo specifically, and then one on the Bingo Wars between United and Bally. Bally soundly trounced United, but it took him a little while. On top of that, I wanted to mention some of the resources that we have out there for bingos. There is Phil's wonderful site that's full of technical information. That includes paperwork for every single bingo machine, as well as flyers, schematics, just about anything that you could hope for in order to repair these machines. And Phil himself is a great resource. If he has time, he answers technical questions, and he is a very nice guy, and I'm very, very glad that he hosts that site. I reference it almost daily, so it is a wonderful resource. On top of that, there are the Bally Bingos in Britain forums, and those are just a simple forum, kind of like Pinside or RGP, where you can chat about bingos and discuss problems and how to fix them and so forth. I haven't been posting there as much recently since I've got my games fixed up, and now I understand quite a bit more about the technical aspects. So if something breaks, I typically don't really have a question anymore. I just reference the schematics and confirm what I think might be the problem, but it took me a while to get to this point. So Phil's site is located at bingo.cdyn.com. Aside from that wonderful resource, there's also Danny's site, which gives stories and people's experiences playing bingos over the years, and that's at danny.cdyn.com. The earliest bingos in the 1950s had either a single card or multiple cards, and depending on how much money you put into the machine, it would light additional cards. Now, you increase your chances of winning by having multiple cards lit. So the general idea, just like in regular paper bingo, is to get 3, 4, or ideally 5 in a row. There weren't multiple odds on these earliest bingos. It would just count up a number of replays and award them to you based on the highest number in a row you had on a particular card. There were also rollovers that, when lit, would spot a number on the bingo cards. These early bingos also had an extra ball feature, so you could pay to get additional balls above the 5-ball limit that is normally present on a bingo. Atlantic City, for example, had 3 extra balls, multiple chances. So you'd have a total of 8 balls on a 25-hole playfield. After those initial games, they moved to a 6-card setup, which they continued to produce throughout the entire time that Bally was creating these bingos. I thought they had stopped in the 60s, but I recently learned that they had continued making them into the 70s. So aside from lighting different cards at mystery intervals or having features where you shot into each corner of the card to earn a special amount of replays if that feature was lit, they also had the ability to increase your odds up to 200 for 5 in a row. Beyond that, and the typical extra ball features, these early games didn't have a method for the user to tell the game to count your replays. So as soon as you scored 3 in a row, it would start racking up the replays. There was no additional coil that would fire, allowing the search to begin. The search was just continuous. Now on these earlier machines, that search disk will wear down because it's just constantly running, and the motor needs a little bit more maintenance, perhaps, than a later game where there is an R button on the foot rail that allows you to control when the game searches. Now, it only starts counting replays after you shoot your 4th ball, and that's been a feature, as far as I know, from the very beginning. So this prevents someone who gets 3 in a row and then tilts from receiving multiple replays. A tilt disqualifies your entire game. So as soon as you tilt, it's not like it will just load up the next ball. You have to start a fresh game completely. There's no way to continue where you left off. Beyond that, Bally produced a game called Hi-Fi, which I find beautiful. I've never played one of these, or really any of these very early bingos. Hi-Fi was unique in that it had a button that would allow you to nudge the playfield. So instead of the user tiring themselves out by nudging the machine themselves, they could push a button and a solenoid would bump the playfield. I'm assuming they removed this because it was kind of player unfriendly. You lost control rather than controlled the ball all the way down. Further bingo innovation happened with a Superline feature, which when lit would allow 2 in a row to score as 4. In 1954, Bally introduced Magic Lines, and this began the ability for the player to control where the numbers were positioned on the bingo card. This is a fantastic feature. I've played a Magic Line game for the first time this past year at the York Show. And when you light the feature, it allows you to move an entire line of numbers to the right or left or up or down, depending on where the line is positioned. This is wonderful because it allows you to score in multiple lines very easily if you have the feature lit. One thing that bears mentioning, once they moved to allowing the player to pick where their numbers were positioned, Bally introduced something called a time tree. The time tree is a machine-controlled lockout of the buttons that allow you to select where the numbers are positioned. So just because you have the feature lit, it does not mean that you have control of those numbers all the way through the end of the game. The lockout begins after you shoot your 3rd ball, before you shoot your 4th ball. So if I shoot my 3rd ball and I realize that I want to reposition my numbers into a different section, I can do that right up to the point that I plunge that 4th ball. At that point, the buttons are locked out. Now, there were features introduced which would allow you to increase the time tree, and the typical way to increase was through rollovers on the playfield, or the machine would just award them to you on a mystery interval. So you could either have the default before 4th, or you could have before 5th or after 5th, and obviously the most desirable is after 5th. So on a Magic Line game, if you have after 5th lit and you have all your Magic Lines lit, you can move the numbers all over the place and potentially score in multiple sections. Now again, this is before player-controlled replay counting, so the game just figures it out, which is pretty neat when you experience it for the first time. It bears noting that Bally's replay meters were locked to 3 digits. So the maximum you could typically acquire was somewhere in the 800 range, and that's because the hardware just couldn't turn anymore. Once you had your replays racked up, then you would get them paid out. And so that's what made these gambling devices in many jurisdictions. And that's why Bally continued to innovate and introduce more and more features to stay one step ahead of the law. So if I racked up 800 replays on one of these Magic Lines games, or more realistically, 400 or 500, each replay counts as a nickel. And I would go to the bar owner or whoever was operating the machine and say, hey, got a whole bunch of replays on this machine. Do you want me to stay and play those off, or is there something else you can do for me? The owner would come over, take a look at the machine, verify your score, and then pay you. And at that point, they would turn the machine off and then back on, and all the replays would tick off of the machine one at a time. Tick, 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 until it got down to 0. And then you put in your money, and you start over. And that's all for episode 2. Next episode, join me as I'll talk about Magic Pockets and hopefully Magic Screen, which is my favorite type of bingo. So again, you can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com, and you can find the show on foramusementonly.libsyn.com. Thanks for joining me. Talk to you later.